Welcome everybody. I'm very excited to have you here, and we're all very excited to talk to you. As you're all aware, this is the Graduate Certificate in Transdisciplinary Learning. So we'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands the UTS City campus now stands. We would like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge to this land. I'd also like, please, to show everyone a piece of artwork called, in English, Our Future, by the Indigenous artist Soretta Fielding, which represents a partnership between a New South Wales government initiative called Their Futures Matter and Aboriginal communities. Central to the work are 3 traditional people symbols reflective of Their Futures Matter, with further people symbols facing outward towards community. Circling this image is a pathway that reflects the journey travelled by all stakeholders to create strong partnerships between community, Aboriginal organisations and government. And red gathering circles upon the path depict Aboriginal tribal groups across the New South Wales footprint alongside all stakeholders. The outer people symbols facing into the centre hold a threefold meaning: the nurturing of our children, supporting families toward better outcomes, and embracing a shared vision of great futures for all. And I'm showing you this because I think it's a great visual representation of co-design in the community and of collective learning between different cultures, stakeholders, communities, and sectors. I think it's an example of transdisciplinary learning in action. So, to start our exploration of the new Grad Cert in Transdisciplinary Learning, I'll pass you over to the course director, Dr. Tanya Goljan.
Thanks, Adrian, and hello, everyone. This evening, you'll meet some of our teaching staff, and also this evening, we have Michelle joining us, who works on our outreach activities. Joining us in the Grad Cert subjects, we will also have various guest contributors from across our university, some of our national and international collaborators, as well as external partners from industry, organisations and communities. In this room, you'll hear an overview of the program, key features, course structure, teaching and learning strategies to expect, as well as a little background about transdisciplinary education at UTS. In the next room, which you can just see to the left, we'll delve deeper into the subjects and micro-credentials, and you'll get to hear more practice-based examples from Claire, Sean, Adrian, and myself. So the program offers 2 streams: the standard stream tailored for individuals, and also the enterprise stream, which is tailored for organisations and for teams. On our website, you can find these 2 info packs that provide further details, opportunities, and contacts as well. Some of the key features of this TD Learning program include flexible online learning. We have a focus on addressing complex problems or opportunities, and also learning collectively. We work towards understanding and working with transdisciplinary practices, TD practices for short. We work with complexity, with futures and ecosystems. We also have a focus on breadth, exploring lots of ideas from diverse disciplines and practices. And we welcome diversity and we also build towards professional networks. So the program consists of 6 3-credit point subjects running over 5 weeks, and we have 1 6-credit point subject which runs over 10 weeks. Subjects can be taken in any order, other than you need to complete a requisite subject before doing the Living Learning Lab, which is the 6-credit point subject. We also recommend you do the TD Learning for Change as your first subject. All the Grad Cert subjects are also offered as equivalent micro-credentials. There are 3 core subjects and 3 studio subjects. Their practice-based focus means all participants bring their knowledge, experiences and curiosity to these subjects and take what they learn and generate in their work with us to trial in their professional practice and their communities, to continue with the conversations and designing opportunities where you're putting TD learning into action in your contexts. In the core subjects, we introduce you to TD learning concepts and to frameworks, theories, methods, and case studies. And we couple that with putting into practice complex problem solving, inquiry approaches, and imaginative ethical leadership. In the studio subjects, you are immersed in complex professional learning and educational challenges that actually cut across sectors and stakeholders. You work together with external partners and academic researchers to generate new insights and initiatives for action, while also considering the relevance of those developments to your own professional contexts and networks. So learning in the studio environment is inquiry-driven, it's creative, and it's rigorous. So back in late 2012, we started to work on our first undergrad transdisciplinary program, the BCII. Over the years, we've used TD approaches to develop these other undergraduate and postgraduate offerings. Working closely with industry stakeholders, there were many questions and strategic priorities driving the design and development of those programs. For example, we were using the clock of the long now metaphor, which some of you might be aware of. And we were asking questions such as, how might we conceive of education fit not only for the 21st century, but that would somehow reverberate into the next? So taking that long view, what capabilities ought we support our students to develop? What is it about our graduates that will make them highly valued within society, both now and into the future? Here are some of the ways these programs are distinctive. The BCII and Diploma in Innovation, for example, are combined with professional degrees in other faculties and disciplines, bringing that diversity of disciplinary perspectives into the classroom. In the development of these programs, we were actually putting TD learning practices into action, working with ideas about complexity, about futures, innovation ecosystems, and TD methods. And we were doing that with industry partners and with communities to tackle complex applied problems, and including our students and academic teachers in that work. If you have any questions at any time during this session, ask them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We will respond to as many as possible at the end of this session. We've allocated 15 minutes to do that, or a little bit more time. And we'll also follow up on the website if we don't actually get an opportunity to answer all your questions. We're also running some interactions during this session with you, and in that case, we'll ask you to use the chat function. So let's head now into the next room to take a look at the subjects themselves and how they work together. As I mentioned, there are 3 core subjects, which you can see on the wall with the red background. And the studio subjects have the grey background, and the lab is in black. Each core subject is coupled with a studio subject in some way, which we'll talk about. In these 2 subjects, the focus is on you as a transdisciplinary learner and inquirer. TD Learning for Change introduces you to transdisciplinary practices. We trial different methods, techniques, perspectives, and approaches from a range of different fields, disciplines, and stakeholders to reframe a significant challenge worth pursuing. We also explore the value of collective learning using a particular creative method. In this transformational learning studio, you work as a team to tackle a current complex challenge that cuts across sectors and professions. And we usually choose a challenge that is timely and that's really pressing. So by using creative provocations, we playfully explore how transformations become possible and also visible, and we track how they might occur. We use inquiry-inspired approaches where questions can be more transforming than answers. In these studios, we work with many different stakeholders. Adrian will now talk a little bit about what that looks like in operation in his transdisciplinary learning practice.
Hi again, everybody. So I work in the spaces where students, industry professionals, and academics work and learn together. This might include things like internships or industry projects and challenges. And throughout these types of experiences, there are very different stakeholders with very different needs. For example, a student might participate in work-integrated learning because they want to determine their fit with a potential career or industry. A host organization might require a short-term flexible source of labor, and academics might want students to be able to connect theory with practice to really enhance the overall learning experience. So given these very different, I think often conflicting stakeholder aims, it's important to find ways of enabling discussion and reflexivity. If all stakeholders understand each other, they can co-create new aims and new experiences to suit the needs of everyone involved. And in my experience, transdisciplinary methods and mindsets can enhance the quality of the required stakeholder interactions. Now, last year, I actually helped to design and deliver a new subject called the Professional Immersive Experience, or PIEX for short. This in itself was in response to a complex challenge out of COVID, and it involved undergraduate students, a top-tier professional services consultancy, a government-funded regional development body, 4 secondary partner organizations across things like technology and change management, and 48 individual partners contributing as mentors, workshop leaders, and panelists. Now, in total, there were 60 undergraduate students, 89 industry professionals, 12 university professionals, and 6 academics, all working within the boundaries of a single subject. Now, it would have been an impossible task for us to design a learning experience to align with the needs of everyone involved. So my approach was to use transdisciplinary methods and create spaces and opportunities for everyone involved to shape that experience for themselves. And in this way, all stakeholders were able to participate as equal partners and create a learning experience which aligned with their personal needs and the needs of their peers and industry partners. I'd just like to now just invite everyone to use the chat function just for 2 minutes to talk a little bit about stakeholders. I'll cut and paste the question into the chat, but to read it out first, I'm keen to know with everybody that's here, how many different stakeholders actually influence the work you do and the decisions you make? Is it less than 5? Is it 5 to 15? Is it more than 15? I'm going to put that into the chat. It would be great to see who we have here. 5 to 15 from Chad. I would expect that to be the average. Anybody less than 5? Anybody more than 15? 5 to 15 from Nicole. More than 15. I'm keen to know what Jeff does. That must be difficult to manage. Janet, 5 plus, okay. It can be just, I think it can be just as challenging to meet the needs of large groups of stakeholders as it can for a small group. There's many different reasons for that. All right, excellent. So some varied answers there, and I think that's important to note. We all deal with different stakeholders. We all deal with different numbers of stakeholders. So this is the key question that I'm going to post in there now. How important is it to you and the work that you do that you actually incorporate the needs of these different stakeholders? And why is that? And I'll give you 30 seconds or so to think about that, because I know it's not a one-word answer. How important is it to you and your work, and why? And this is information not just for me and for the team to understand. It's good for you to think about this coming into this subject, to think about your surroundings, your environment, who it is you work with, and why it's important to you in your work. I mean, I can talk to this while people are writing down quick answers. In education, within WIL, there's multiple stakeholders. We have students, we have industry partners, we have parents of students. 10 out of 10 from Jeff, because it's all about community engagement. I'd agree. Oh, unfortunately, Adam isn't picking up the questions. I'm not sure why you're not getting that, Adam. I'll give it a couple more seconds if anybody else has anything to share. One new message from Chad. Thanks, Chad. Extremely. Builds empathy and promotes voice with finding. So it's important, isn't it? We all know it's important. Personally, I think it can be very difficult to do, but I certainly learned through grad cert myself, there's some fantastic methods for enabling stakeholder interaction. Before we move on, there's one last one here. Absolutely essential. Completely agree. Community, parents, colleagues, so many different stakeholders, so many challenges. Okay, fantastic. Thank you all. I'll hand back to Tanya.
Okay, the next two subjects. So in these two subjects, the focus really is on designing TD learning environments. So in the core, let me just close this. So in the core subject, we engage you in design provocations from different disciplines and professions. And we try and do that in a really creative and unexpected way. You explore and use various creative methods, futuring approaches and inquiry methods as you prototype TD learning experiences. So we try and use lots of different prototyping kind of methods to really get you out of your comfort zone and to think in quite different ways. It's also an opportunity for you to design a small-scale, safe-to-fail experiment for testing in your professional practice. And we really do mean it as a small scale, something that you can actually implement in your environment the next day or the next week. With the studio, in this studio subject, we ask this question: what if learning environments, initiatives, or organisations were more like regenerative ecosystems? And we use the concept of regeneration, which is popping up in a whole lot of professions and disciplines at the moment as an extension and a different way of thinking about sustainability. And we use that concept of regeneration as a metaphor for reimagining how we might design future-oriented TD learning experiences. So what we do, we'll be working with external partners, and together we explore the regenerative principles which we distill from those current practices out there in the real world. And we think about how such principles might shape learning, innovation, and transformative pathways to ethical futures. Indeed, future thinking runs as a thread through the grad cert subjects. And we deal with the different methods and the different approaches from different perspectives in the different subjects in different ways. So lots of, diversity in how we look at these methods and these kind of approaches. So Claire will now share with you some of her creative practices on futures.
Hey everyone, thanks Tanya. So you might be wondering why we say futures instead of the future, because that's probably a more correct way of saying it. But there's actually a really important reason why we do that, which is that what we're trying to get people, if you think about it, the future actually doesn't exist. the future is actually a story that we tell. And it's perhaps one of the most important stories that we tell, because our expectations of what the future will be determine a lot of our actions in the present. So in futures thinking, we really are going to encourage you to think of this idea of seeing alternative futures. And we'll teach you how to kind of expand your thinking so you're able to kind of explore these multiple future scenarios. And if you think about it, there's probably never been a more important time to do this. We're facing this increasing degree of uncertainty about climate change and global politics and impacts of technology such as automation and artificial intelligence. So being able to imagine different future possibilities and being able to plan for them and build resilience into your systems is really, really important. Now, I just wanted to share a little kind of thing with you guys that I think is kind of interesting, especially with the framing of this idea of regenerative futures. So in futures thinking, we tend to think about the future in kind of 4 ways. We kind of have 4 dominant narratives, if you like, about the future. And these are continual growth, which is really the one that kind of suggests things will be business as usual. The economy will keep growing, GDP will keep growing, everything will keep getting better. We have the story of constraint, so where we kind of imagine governments coming in and putting regulations in to kind of control growth or control trouble that might be occurring. We have collapse, which is obviously one that is kind of apocalyptic, that things will kind of all collapse. And we have this one about transformation. And I think that it's really the last one that is really powerful and that we're going to really explore in this Regenerative Futures Lab unit. But like, how do we do that? How do we kind of think about the future in these different ways? Well, in this unit, we're going to look at lots of different things. We will kind of explore the myths that we kind of hold when we think about the future and kind of unpick some of those business as usual myths. We'll explore what we mean by regenerative futures, and we'll look at megatrends and some weak signals that are emerging. And lastly, we'll explore how we create our own visions for the future and how we can share these visions with people and also enact them. So in the past, I've used these processes with lots of students, and in a really exciting way, they have contributed to real world projects like the City of Sydney's 2050 vision, which they've just released, the Atlassian Tech Precinct that they're kind of planning for, and even a program that brought in Celestino and CSIRO, who are doing a big development around Badgerys Creek. And like, say, for example, with the City of Sydney one, the students thought about what kind of futures we wanted and how we could make them, and then presented them to the City of Sydney. And these were actually put into the 2050 plan. So they literally helped create a plan for the future. And I think that's pretty cool. Lastly, on this slide, I've put up an image of a project called Museum of Futures. This is an award-winning project created in partnership with City of Sydney that really brings together communities, organisations and decision makers to not just imagine transformative futures, but also to create objects out of them that they can then share with other people. So lots of really fun stuff ahead. Back to you, Tanya. Oh, sorry. Oh, my questions. I'm sorry, I forgot. Oh, I've got these great questions for you guys. Okay, so my questions were, or are, when you think about the future, what do you see? I'm really curious to know. So can everyone pop into the chat? When you think about the future, what comes to mind? I'm glad you prefer transformation, Jeff. And MJ, that's great. Now I can't see any answers. Are there any answers yet? Collaboration and diversity. Thanks, Adrian. Anyone got any specific images? What does everyone see? Innovation, cool. Does anyone see anything in particular? Indigenous knowledges, great. That's a great one, Jeff. Any other specific things? Does anyone have any? Okay, well, this is a good point, MJ. I really love the fact that you've actually picked on something negative. So, because my next question was going to be, what would you like to see in the future? So I'll put that in. Because part of the work of futures that's really interesting is the fact that sometimes what we see in the future is not what we want in the future. And a lot of it is because we're kind of getting these pictures of the future from people who have an agenda, or through the media or through social media. So it can be really worthwhile and really powerful to think about what we want in the future. Does anyone have any other things to add? What would you like to see in the future? Oh, beautiful, Nicole. I love curiosity. I think that's such a lovely one. Ooh, education revolution. Fantastic. Oh, these are great, guys. Very inspiring. If there's if there's not any more, I'll throw back to you, Tanya, so we can continue. But really great, guys. Thanks for sharing those.
Okay, thanks, Claire. So in these last two subjects, or the next two subjects, the focus, we shift the focus to really collective learning from a systems kind of perspective. So just talking about that a little bit more, we use methods and concepts to think differently about and map learning systems. And you've already been talking about stakeholders and the many people that are involved in these kinds of projects. So you can already see that this that there are complex kind of interactions, and looking at what learning looks like in those kind of learning systems is something that we kind of start exploring. And the reason we kind of start doing that as we consider initiatives and potential educational and societal impact, what we really want to do is identify where do we make leverages in those systems? What do we choose to do and why? And in that process, we also examine measures of impact and quality. What do both of those things do, and how are they connected to what gets valued? So that's I think that it seems from the work that we've been doing that that's a really important subject, because to get real change, thinking of it at a systems level enables us to, I guess, make those transformations. So, and then in this studio, we not only design programs for entrepreneurial learning and experimenting, but we also consider how we might bring that entrepreneurial thinking to our own educational and professional learning work. So how might we become system thinkers when putting into practice new initiatives? So systems thinking also runs as a thread through the grad cert subjects. I'm going to hand over to Sean now, who will share with you some of the projects he's been involved in that have drawn on taking system perspectives and actually leveraging opportunities for change.
That must be me. I hope you can all hear me. I live near a train line. Talk about complex systems. Trains, when they go past with all the people on them, use up my bandwidth on my hotspotting phone. So there's a sign of emergence for you. But, you know, systems, I don't need to tell you about them. We all live in them. We're all part of systems, and we will notice happening all the time in systems. So really, I suppose where I'm coming from systems is that, let me first of all tell you about my slide here. It's at the center is an image of a person. I'm from a health background, I'm from an educationalist as well, and I'm just a person that exists in systems where I like to value the person in these systems, the whole system and the whole person. That is, I like bring a well-being focus in what I do with systems systems thinking and working with people on projects on how you also value the people and their knowledge, not as disciplinary knowledge, but also from their life context as well. The things with systems that they're influences, and these influences all the time through information. And we can see systems and complexity as an ecosystem of communication. So in this case, then, this image is quite interesting because it emerged from a project that I was involved with last year called the Constellation Project. And it's dealing with something we call a problem. It wasn't a problem, and it's called homelessness, which shouldn't be a problem, and it shouldn't be something we need to be working on. But it was a project that emerged from a whole group of different stakeholders who realised, and these were people from right across different sectors, from philanthropic, from community, from social, from business, who realised they all had an interest in homelessness, on how to actually fix the problem. And they realised that from a systems perspective, that all vying effectively and working in that same space, but vying for that same pot of money. And so they said, this is silly. You know, we're all replicating systems. We're all bashing our heads against ourselves for this same sort of opportunity to help our own respective communities. And that gave birth to something called the Constellation Project. And the Constellation Project has now come together as a collection of transsectional people and interests that include policy, that include government, that include businesses, educators, academics, as well as practitioners and people in community who are knowledge holders in their own right in their own communities, on how to address and how to actually work with meeting this challenge of building 100,000 homes within 10 years. So coming back to this image, it's interesting because this image was done by someone who was homeless at the time. And it was done by a friend of mine who happens to be neurodiverse and was homeless. And this is the type of person who would benefit from something like this project coming to fruition. So really then, I suppose what I'm trying to say to you is that you know, the thing about the systems is we have what is called systems holdback. And by seeing systems, you start to see the paradoxes. And those paradoxes give insight on how to challenge systems, but also work with systems, but also how to address things like double binds. For example, the fact that we getting cars to drive around because the public transport is not effective enough for where we live. At the same time, knowing by driving around in our cars, we're producing pollution that effectively will lead to our extinction. They're double binds and they emerge from systems. And, you know, this language too of emergence and complexity, it's such a flat language these days because everyone uses those terms. But the thing about systems is they give us perspective on how to see different, those challenges and possibilities to transform them into something different. And certainly with education. So I suppose that's my bit of a spiel about complexity and certainly about systems, but mostly it's about honouring self as well and honouring you as someone complex in your own systems. So really then what I particularly want to talk about, or a question I'm going to pose for you all, is something about the future, not the future, but something you've noticed, something you've seen about your own systems in most recently. And I'm going to talk about COVID-19. And specifically with COVID-19, it became most apparent the knock-on effects of different parts of our system interacting and causing further consequences to happen. So in terms of certainly the last 12 months that we've all experienced, I'm going to pose a very simple question, and that is, what was revealed for you? And I'll just type that into chat as well. Another way of looking at it too is what was noticed. And it's through those noticings that we see those revelations and we start to see those connections with our communications ecology. And that informs how we see the world. But more interesting, it adds further perspective on us to see differently and change how we engage with the world as well. Intergenerational learning, I love it, Jeff. Absolutely agree. And that's something that we saw happening most especially over the last 12 months. this idea on how younger generations can inform older generations can inform younger generations, but how generations together also learn together in complex systems. Adapting and thriving is really interesting, and adapting and thriving, that pursuit towards excellence in life, how to live the good life as such, but also how to build that reflexivity. So when systems change and the variables that gave rise to that system change, it changes and the challenges we have as well. So often when we design so-called solutions to problems, no such thing as solving a problem. That's the problem, is the problem solving. We need to meet the challenge. And so we have reflexivity. So how do you design a learning environment that's also reflexive to change in systems, which is a great question as well. And the fact that we really are more capable, and more specifically, I love that, MJ, the fact that, your complex self, and all of you, not just your disciplinary knowledge, but your knowledge on how you engage with your family, your knowledge and experience of growing up, your place in society, but where you live geographically, all those are learnings that should and can inform that complex learning space that we want to transform for the future. So I'm just watching my time, because I can talk too much in these spaces once I get on a roll. But particularly, I do have one other thing I'd like to ask you, and that is about your journey in transdisciplinary learning. And more specifically, what captured your curiosity to imagine differently approach to learning and education? And I'll just put that as a complex question. No, it's not. It's complicated. But I'll put that one in the chat as well. But in particular, I want to know what captured your interest to actually start considering an approach that was different from what you've been doing before, or an approach that continued to enrich a journey that you'd already started. So for myself, I've been an educator for 25 years. And so saying that too, I say an educator, but I'm also a learner in that space and learning all the time. And I found for myself that it's great to talk about systems objectively. It's great to see complexity objectively. But the fact is, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with relationships, and that often we found those contexts, those learning contexts, fail to honour the whole person and that learning they brought in. Jeff, I love your commentary as well as everyone's here as well, who's not saying things but should be saying things, because this is a wonderful space for us to learn together, even from this presentation today. Local context is really, really important, because a so-called challenge often is influenced by contextual factors within specific environments. And if you design something to suit those challenges you're facing in that environment and move to somewhere else, it's out of context, it's no longer fit for purpose. So, complexities and systems, we exist in it, we are part of it, and I'm now going to shut up and pass over to Tanya once more. Thank you.
That's terrific, Sean. Thank you. So the final subject that we're going to be talking about tonight in any detail is this 6 credit point lab. And this is the one that runs over 10 weeks. And it actually connects you to a live research project which explores educational and professional learning challenges that we as researchers and practitioners from different sectors are actually tackling together. And we're doing that through taking a transdisciplinary learning approach. So it's a live research project that we bring into this space to interact with you. So yeah, that's probably as much as I'll say, watching the time. So my question, which in terms of the case that I'm going to be talking about, which is really short. So in the subject teams that I've been working with to develop this program, we're starting to kind of elicit and pull out and shape the kinds of questions we're really interested in inquiring about that are related to what we're exploring in these grad cert subjects with you. So here, as Adrian has talked about, we too are learners, we're researchers, we're designers, and we're teachers in how we collaborate with you as participants in the program. So in these kind of really collective learning situations, as you can imagine, ethical considerations of how we learn and inquire together, as in all transdisciplinary initiatives, whether research or education, really need to be examined sensitively and respectfully. So now, Adrian, if you can post in to the chat my questions. We're really interested in hearing from you, what are the questions, or whether there are questions that you're mulling over and want to address with others or to tackle with others. What are they? How about questions that are important to the people you work with? Is there an area of interest you think ought to be tackled or investigated? So let me just. So as we said earlier, and as we've been talking about, these subjects and experiences and projects that we introduce as we're working with industry partners are really inquiry driven. They're really asking and exploring things that are pressing to understand and to know. So we place ourselves into spaces of unknowns where we actually don't know something. So we bring our best thinking and we bring people who need to be working with us in the space, as Adrian was talking about, you know, the stakeholders, but also people with expertise to help us work together to, I guess, try to better understand the challenge itself. And we bring, obviously, as we've been talking about, different methods and different kind of approaches to that task. And we don't just leave it at that. We actually work up, I guess, initiatives or small-scale probes or experiments, and we trial things, because it's through the trialing and whether it's successful or unsuccessful, and that's why we call them safe to fail, we learn and we do that together. So no questions. Maybe this is something that that needs a little bit more thought, a little bit more time, sorry, for you to kind of explore that. So I'm going to move on, because we really want to, I guess, hear more of your Q&As, just to signal that there is another subject which is part of the enterprise stream within the grad cert. And if you want to know more about it, there is that information pack for organisations that actually talks about and situates that subject within the grad cert program. Whoops. Sorry about that. Let me just take you back to the other room. Okay, so back in 2016, I entered a keynote presentation with the following words, which I wanted to share with you here. So here we are at the cusp of UTS's Transdisciplinary Learning futures. From my perspective as an educational design researcher, these UTS developments provide an unprecedented opportunity and responsibility to reimagine education fit for a 21st century, a complex challenge in itself. And as we tackle that challenge at a pace befitting the current urgency and demand to equip our graduates for their long now, it is these words of Liz Coleman that come to mind. Being overwhelmed is the first step if you are serious about trying to get at things that really matter on a scale that makes a difference. So what do you do when you feel overwhelmed? Well, you have two things. You have a mind and you have other people. Start with those and change the world. Now in 2021, we are further along in that TD journey. And with the launch of the new grad cert in TD Learning, we hope you join us, and we look forward to our continuing work together to reimagine education as transdisciplinary, to tackle the complex challenges of our time. So I'd like to now invite you, if you have any questions, to use the Q&A function, and we will open up and engage with those questions with you. So can I invite Adrian and Sean and Claire to join us as well?
I just wanted to address, Jeff asked a question about who owns IP. I don't know if that's a general question around students engaged in this or in a world we move into that has a community of knowledge. If it is regarding UTS, I'm not an expert in IP. I can't offer legal advice, but I can tell you that UTS's stance is students own the IP they create within their coursework and academic work. It is a great question, Jeff, for the future of education. And I think it's one well worth exploring.
I see there's a question about prerequisites to being accepted into the program. So we have multiple entry pathways into the program. What we've done is we've developed micro-credentials, which are equivalent to the grad cert subjects. And we actually are looking to combine those cohorts in creative ways. So there are no prerequisites in terms of the micro-credentials, except for, as I mentioned, the Living Learning Lab, which requires another subject to enter into that. To get into the grad cert through that pathway, through the micro-credential pathway, it's successful completion of 2 of the micro-credentials. And so there's that pathway. And then there's also the pathway that we have, which is an undergraduate degree program, an undergraduate degree program plus 2 years professional experience. And we also, if those 2 conditions are not met, then we also have the ability to make the case for your experience into the program. So what we welcome in this program is diversity. So we recognise that people are coming from lots of different, I guess, sectors and areas, not just from education. And it's that diversity that actually makes the program come alive in many ways. And that's what we found from our experience. So the focus is on learning, educational, professional learning, and how we go about designing environments and how we understand learning that happens in these environments and how we support that kind of learning. So I don't know if that answers the question. Oh, and by the way, there is extensive information about the program online, and there are contact details there. By all means, contact me via email, and I will happily answer any of your questions as well. That's a really good question about whether this is only based in Sydney or remote as well. COVID has made us realise that we can do and we can work and learn online in really creative ways. So what we haven't used today is the kind of creative collaboration software that we use in our programs in response to the COVID situation. So this year, the program is totally online. There is no on-campus kind of classes. And that, as you can probably realise, opens up lots of opportunities because we have people internationally who have expressed a real interest in doing the program. So it means that they can join in. But also we're looking to 2021, where we might offer certain components in hybrid mode, which means we would offer potentially intensive weekend kind of sessions that are offered both on campus but also totally online. So, and that's something that we would explore next year. And part of what the work that we do this year is learning from, I guess, participants, what are their, I guess, preferences. So yeah, that gives a little bit of a sense of where we will be based. So this year, we're based totally online. And going back to the question about pathways, we've also created a pathway from the graduate certificate into the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. And we're looking to create other pathways into other kind of programs. So, yeah, that just opens up the grad cert a little bit more. And please do contact us if anything arises or you want to have a conversation about the program in more detail. We're happy to have those kind of conversations. And also to understand your interests, because that's what makes these programs come alive in many ways. So yeah, don't hesitate to be in contact.
People are now saying thank you, Tanya, but of course we want to say thank you to everybody who came here to listen. It wouldn't exist without you.
We do have another question that just came in, Tanya, in regards to the time for the subjects and studios. Can you indicate what the time load would be? Are we talking 3 to 5 hours per week?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with a graduate certificate qualification, for a 3 credit point subject, the total load is 75 hours. So what we do is we're going to open, before the official opening, the official teaching of the program. So, for example, the 3 credit point subjects run for 5 weeks. What we'll do is we'll open up for at least 2 weeks prior to the start to give people an opportunity to engage with the material. And then there's, at the end, there's a kind of another additional week where to complete the final assessment. So in some ways, it's kind of 5 weeks where we're teaching, where we're online working with each other. And then there's 2 weeks up front and a week after to finish the final assessment. So it's 8 weeks. So it's about a little under 10 hours a week. And that includes everything, both assessments, the interaction online, any reading and thinking. And what we've done, just to give you a sense that with each of the micro-credentials and the subjects, it is really integrated with practice. So it's not, it's in some ways, it's not thinking about study as separate from the work that you're doing out there in your day-to-day job. So, and we've done that specifically to I guess, that integration in your work means, and in your professional practice, again brings the, so to speak, content alive, and it means it gives you a way of testing the ideas in practice. So I don't know if that kind of makes sense, or that kind of answers the question. The next intake. So the next intake is in August. So in the info pack, you will see, in the information packs, you'll see the dates for each of the sessions. So August is when we start the TD Learning for Change subject. And it runs, you can complete the grad cert in a year. If you want to take longer than that, there is also that kind of option as well, that flexibility built in. but the first intake is August. The second intake will be in March of next year. The third intake will be in August next year.
And applications for the grad cert do close on the 27th of June.
But we do encourage you to obviously get that application in as soon as